Hi, it's Dwyer. It is March 20th, 2024. GamblersAdvisory.com, a free site. BettingAngle.us, a free site. Remember, the opinion you should follow should be your own. Just consider this video to be a second opinion from a complete stranger online. Now, in my favorites folder, I have a very important video. It's from 2014. It is Frazer Clarke, who's about to fight Fabio Wardley, right? Very decorated British heavyweight in the amateur ranks. It's Frazer Clarke against Joyce, right? Let me just say, even then, Joyce had no idea how to guard against long right hands, right? Even then, Joyce is getting hit with an inordinate amount of right hands. Let me just say, the film is striking because Joyce lands several quality shots on Frazer Clarke, right? Several quality shots. At some point, people have to realize that if an opponent, particularly someone with not A-level hand speed like Joyce, I don't mean to pick on Joe, but this is a gambling site. It's not a fan club site. We're just going to call it as we see it. Joe does not have fast hands. When you see a guy who does not have fast hands, who has a certain amount of predictability, and the guy is able to land as many hard punches to the face of Frazer Clarke, in my eyes, you know that Frazer Clarke is not going to beat the wild card. And that's what he is, of the heavyweight division, Fabio Wardley. Right? Let me point out that Frazer Clarke actually looks good against Joe. Frazer Clarke lands his own punches. The problem is, Juggernaut isn't staggered by them. Now, we know that's Joyce's thing. He tries to look tough even when he's fighting guys like Joe Parker. Right? Juggernaut's going to try to walk through punches. But you saw a different level of punching power when he went up against Zhili Zhang. Right? Blessed punchers can hurt Joyce. What this film of Frazer Clarke against Joyce tells you, in addition to Joyce landing a lot of shots up top, is that Frazer Clarke doesn't hit hard enough to get Joyce off the spot. In other words, Frazer Clarke, regardless of size, regardless of pedigree, is not a blessed puncher. Right? Let me just say this. Fabio Wardley is. I also want to introduce a concept here. Right? I'm sure you've heard of it before, but people don't really, at least I don't really talk about it much when analyzing fights. And that's the concept of variance. You know the guy who isn't elite. Let's define elite here. An elite guy is someone like Michael Jordan in his prime. Right? Jordan once, in a book, talked about how easy it was to score 32 points in an NBA game. Right? At least Jordan thought it was easy. And as Jordan put it, talking about the quarters, he said 32 is just 8, 8, 8, and 8. Right? That's the way the greats think. Right? It's possible to dominate, so I'm going to dominate. Right? Now, I'm sure the Jordan who ended up with the Washington Wizards realized that for mere mortals, 32 per game in the NBA is difficult. But young Jordan did it. And young Jordan strove to get that standard every night. Understand, even with the Washington Wizard years, Jordan career, even with the layoff where he comes back, Jordan, for his career, averaged around 30 points a game in the NBA. A typical Jordan night was, in his prime, 32 points a game. Let's talk about greatness again. We know Pat Mahomes was spectacular in the second half of this last Super Bowl. But let's go back a year. That was an injured Pat Mahomes. Folks, he was out there with a limp. You know who Pat Mahomes with a limp was? Pat Mahomes. He came back in the second half against Philadelphia. Right? They're blitzing him. That was a dominant blitzing team. They're blitzing him. They're coming at him. Pat Mahomes can't even run. And there's Pat Mahomes limping around, right? Trying to run with a giddy up. And of course, Pat comes back from a double-digit second half deficit, wins a Super Bowl. Right? Those are the greats. The guy could be injured. The guy is out there. Ray Leonard. One eye is blown up. We later find out it has a detached retina. That's arguably Ray's best moment in a fight that he's losing. He comes back and beats Thomas Hearns because he's Ray Leonard. Now, those are the greats. That's not the way life typically works. The way life typically works is that very good athletes, on certain nights, can give you great performances. Right? When I was a little kid, and I mean a little kid, I was watching the New York Mets. That was my family's team. They had a pitching staff to die for. Right at the top of it was Tom Seaver. You had Gary Gentry. You had Jerry Koosman. You might recall the 69 Mets. You might recall the 73 Mets. Well, the Mets also had a guy, and he was too wild. This was a guy who had good stuff, but he couldn't get it over the plate 50% of the time. His name was Nolan Ryan. Let me just tell you, as we would later learn, when Ryan ends up with the California Angels, when Nolan Ryan was on his game, he was unhittable. I think Koufax had the record for the number of no-hitters. Nolan Ryan wiped that out of the books. I believe Nolan ends up with 7 no-hitters. Something like 3 more than Sandy Koufax. Now, truth be told, Koufax was the better pitcher. But not when Nolan was on his A game. Let's make it current. If you bet on basketball, and I bet on basketball more than I want to admit here, you understand that the Nuggets have a guy. Not Joker, who's great. Joker's Joker every night. Right? Not Murray, who's great. Murray's Murray every night. No, they have a wild card. His name's Michael Porter. Right? There's some nights, folks, where Porter's up around 30 points. When Porter's on his A game, forget who the other team is. That other team could be the Boston Celtics. Forget who the other team is. The Nuggets are going to be a handful. The problem is Porter will also have 9-point nights. Now, I want folks to think about Fabio Wardley as the wild card of the heavyweight division. Right? Fabio's a guy who's supposed to have sparred behind the scenes with a lot of A-level talent. Right? He seems to be a Dillian White protege. But understand, Fabio doesn't have an amateur career. Fabio doesn't really know what he's doing in the ring. So there's a fight in my favorites folder right now. Right? Alongside the Joyce, Frazer Clarke fight. It's a fight that I made a prediction on, and I was wrong. No shame in my game. I'll come here and admit when I'm wrong. I thought Nathan Gorman, who is exactly the kind of cagey vet I like, I thought Nathan Gorman was going to beat Fabio Wardley. Right? Wardley, of course, was unbeaten at the time. He's unbeaten now. Right? Understand, Gorman, and you'll see it in the short film that ends with Gorman's corner throwing in the towel. right? Just like, by the way, Frazer Clarke's corner threw in the towel against Joyce. You're going to notice that Gorman is that cagey vet who knows how to punch and hold. In other words, he hits you with the shots he wants, then he comes in and grabs you. Right? You don't know what to do unless you yourself are a cagey vet, which Fabio Wardley isn't. Understand, too, Gorman, much better defense. You'll see times in the fight where there's a lull in the action, Gorman puts his hands up. Much better defense. Also, many more punches. Right? Fabio Wardley has a blessed right hand. It's blessed. It's explosive. You notice the suddenness after looking at the Frazer Clarke film. But understand, Gorman's a little bit more advanced. Gorman is not just throwing right hands. He's throwing right uppercuts. He's slipping in punches. You could see him reading an opponent and figuring out which punch to use in the fight. I think Gorman technically is a lot better than Fabio Wardley. Gorman gets KO'd early, and it's a methodical beatdown. It's not a one-punch knockdown. No, he gets KO'd early. Understand how clueless Fabio Wardley is. Wardley comes in. Wardley thinks that he's fighting out of 1914 or something. He thinks he's fighting Jack Johnson. So he comes in. He has his hands in front of him. I'm not sure what that's supposed to do. He, of course, is in punching range. He's not the slugger who's outside, then finds his way in the pocket when he wants to land shots. Right? This isn't Anthony Joshua. This is a guy who comes in like this. He is around the pocket. Gorman can reach him. Gorman roughs him up. Look at Wardley's face. Wardley has a bloody nose. Wardley has a bloody eye. And Gorman is not a puncher. Right? Fabio Wardley is not defensively blessed. But just understand, the flaws make the diamond. You're looking at Fabio Wardley, who's not jabbing his way in. Right? He's a guy who is getting roughed up and then decides midway through the second round that he's had enough and he's just going to start winging shots. I'm not kidding. And as he's frustrated and he starts winging shots, that's when you notice the talent. That's when you notice that Wardley has fast hands, faster than Gorman. That's when you notice Wardley's an explosive puncher. Gorman, even when he has a hand up, cannot handle the suddenness or the power of Wardley's right hand. In other words, as you're watching the fight, you're thinking, what the hell is Fabio Wardley doing? And then he turns it on and he starts knocking down Gorman. Right? He's so unstructured, folks, that I believe when he's on his A game, this guy with this level of power, with this right hand, he's also two-handed. He has power in his left, but the right hand really stands out. This is the kind of guy who could give anybody in the heavyweight division problems. Think of the concept of variance. I'll agree. He's not an elite fighter. Right? Just like Nolan Ryan, if you look at his career ERA, it's above 3. Right? We're not going to confuse him with Bob Gibson. But you understand, when Nolan was on his A game, he was as good as Bob Gibson. Right? Fabio Wardley, I'll just say, if a free-for-all ensues, which is what happens, by the way, in the Joyce, Frazer Clarke fight, Frazer Clarke is going to be in a lot of trouble. So Wardley cannot compete with Frazer Clarke's amateur pedigree. It does not matter. This is professional prize fighting. I don't believe Frazer Clarke can compete with Fabio Wardley's physicality. suddenness, unstructured surprise element. I like Fabio Wardley in this fight. I think he wins by stoppage. Right? I like Wardley in this fight by stoppage. He's a 200 favorite, a little bit more than a minus 220 favorite. He should be. In boxing, don't go by the amateur pedigree. You have a lot of guys who are pros. Their pedigree comes from privately sparring with big names. Right? Wardley is a guy who isn't as polished as Nathan Gorman. While Gorman has the better technique, Wardley has the talent. Right? You only have to be great on fight night. I'm not saying Wardley is a Jordan level talent. I'm not saying he's a Pat Mahomes level talent. This is the guy who's more like Klay Thompson, the sidekick to Steph Curry. Most of the time, Curry's the man for the Golden State Warriors. But Warrior fans privately know there are those nights where nobody on the court, including Steph, can touch Klay Thompson. Right? Just like the Nuggets know, there are nights when Michael Porter is the centerpiece of that offense. Right? Fabio Wardley, you want to circle his name. This is the guy who, if you ever see him going off at greater than a plus 200, I don't care who he's fighting. Could be Usyk. I don't care who he's fighting. If he's going off at a better than plus 200, you need to sprinkle some speculation money on him. Because this is the guy who is in the ring, gets upset, then starts throwing punches with wild abandon that structured fighters are unprepared for. Right? I could not imagine Wardley being in the position Daniel Dubois was against Usyk. Right? If Wardley hit you and you hit the canvas and the ref called the body shot low, when you got off the canvas, God would have to help you. Avoid Wardley coming forward, emotional, thinking he has a shot to win the fight. Right? This guy's a wild card. Again, he's not the highest level technician. He's not an elite, everyday fighter. I'm sure in his career, he's unbeaten right now. I'm sure in his career, he's going to have an off night or two. He's going to lose some that he shouldn't lose. But he's going to win some that he shouldn't win. I like Wardley by stoppage over Frazer Clarke. That's the way I see it, because Frazer Clarke is an underdog. Right? What you might also want to do is to bet that the fight does not go the distance, because I believe Wardley is going to turn this into a free-for-all. He knows Frazer Clarke is the more polished, is the more structured fighter. So he's going to get Clarke out of his comfort zone by throwing big shots. Right? When a guy comes up and starts throwing as many big punches as Wardley does, plans go out the window. As Mike Tyson used to say, everyone has a plan until they get punched in the mouth. I'm expecting Wardley to win the fight if I can. And I haven't been able to yet. I have a bet on Wardley. But if I can, I'm going to also bet that the fight doesn't go the distance. Right? You can see Frazer Clarke taken out of his game by Joyce 10 years ago. Right? Folks, Joyce is not remotely as explosive as Fabio Wardley. Those are my thoughts. Let me hear yours. I hope you leave them in the comment section of this YouTube video. Thanks for stopping by.